Okay, welcome everybody to the launch of Mission Beyond. I'm Cain, I'm CEO and co-founder of Red Badger. We're a digital consultancy that works with very large complex organisations to help them with digital innovation and transformation. But we're also an extremely purpose-led business. And so Mission Beyond has come from our desire to have societal impact and to work collaboratively cross-sector to do so. I'd like to thank you for giving up your Thursday mornings to join us, to be here. We've got a really amazing group of people here today. I know you can't see each other, but it's a really amazing list of attendees. And so I hope you'll find this morning inspiring and an interesting morning for you. So before I go into the agenda, I just wanted to cover some quick housekeeping. Today we've got a minute, today we finish at 1:15, so we've got an hour and 15 to finish about 12:15. We'll do our best to stick to the schedule, but if the Q&As at the end go on for a bit longer, then we can run over. You can ask some questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen or via the chat. And we've also got Sean and Mara on hand to moderate the Q&A at the end of the session. I'd also like to inform you that we are recording the event today for the benefit of the community, so we may use some of the content for the community after the event. But please let me know after the event if there's anything that you'd like to keep private that's discussed in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that isn't shared. So moving to the agenda for all of our Mission Beyond events, and this is the first, will follow this simple structure of inspire, prove and collaborate. So Inspire will provide some thought leadership around a specific topic related to the event. Prove will then demonstrate the proof of concept around that topic. And then Collaborate will invite debate about how you, the community, can collaborate to have impact at scale. And as this is the launch, I will be introducing Mission Beyond and taking you through how the model works. And then I'm extremely excited to have a special guest in Matthew Syed, who will be providing the inspiration and talking about the power of diverse thinking. Diversity and innovation, as you will see, are key components of the Mission Beyond model. So Matthew's talk will provide you with some inspiration around why it's so important. We then have Harry, who will be taking you through ShareThyme. And ShareThyme is a proof of concept that we've launched as part of the Mission Beyond platform. And it's aligned with UN Sustainable Development Goal number 3, good health and well-being. We'll then talk about the next steps. Andreas will take you through how the coalitions will work and how we'll engage the community, how you can get involved, and then we'll do a bit of Q&A. So here we are. We're all convening virtually rather than in person due to a pandemic that hopefully we'll never see in our lifetimes again. But COVID-19 has stretched healthcare systems to their breaking point globally, and economies are due to suffer their worst impact since the Great Depression. But it's also brought to bear huge issues with society that existed pre-pandemic. So people of Black, Asian or ethnic minority backgrounds are more at risk of COVID-19 related deaths. Access to educational support during lockdown has varied greatly, and it has exacerbated the epidemic of loneliness. And that's just the UK. Like in other countries, following simple instructions to wash your hands regularly is not so simple if you do not have easy access to running water. But there is opportunity that has arisen from this situation. With the reduction of industrial output and human activity, the Earth's had a chance to breathe. And people are talking about the bounce forward and calling for governments to build back better to create a socially just and green recovery. And the choices made now will help us shape our society, economy, and humanity for years to come. And this is why we're here today. We want to bring together business leaders and other actors with brilliant minds and a sense of purpose in their hearts to harness that purpose together and use it to contribute to society and the planet. And we actually started developing Mission Beyond prior to the pandemic last year, but the pandemic has certainly heightened its significance. So I hope at the end of today, you're inspired and want to get involved. So an introduction to Mission Beyond. Mission Beyond is influenced by economist Dr. Mariana Mazzucato and her mission-based approach. Now, the mission-based approach is all about innovation and experimentation to tackle the world's grand challenges. And Mariana describes a grand challenge as a difficult but important systemic and society-wide problem with no silver bullet solution. And a great example of a grand challenge is the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs for short, which act as global grand challenges. Now, the first one starts with ending poverty everywhere. And so to be able to impact a grand challenge such as ending poverty everywhere sounds extremely lofty and in practice hard to achieve, which is where the mission-based approach comes in. So by their very nature, grand challenges are big, bold, difficult and complex. And they have to be broken down into pragmatic steps, which are termed missions. And ultimately, the mission-based approach is all about action. You start with an innovation activity through experimentation, and there's risky or uncertain outcomes. You don't know where it's going to end, but you start to make change happen very early. And this is why we love the model so much, because we see it every day in the work that we do with our clients. Like, we believe that when you start innovation projects, it sparks things, like the culture and energy of teams change, as do their behaviors. And obviously some things fail, that's the nature of experimentation, but some things become the catalyst for great change. And so to make headway into tackling a grand challenge, you have to kick off small innovation projects without really knowing the destination when you start. And you also need radical collaboration across organizations and sectors to have real impact. So Mission Beyond takes these elements of the Mariana model to have social impact at scale through digital. And our aim is to kick off a number of innovation projects in the service of the grand challenges, and we want to facilitate the forming of cross-sector coalitions to collaborate to have impact at scale. And we're already well underway. We've been working with our advisory board and our partners to find a focus over the next 12 months. And to start with, we're looking at missions that relate to 4 of the UN SDGs, which will serve as our grand challenges. So the 4 SDGs are number 3, good health and well-being for all ages. And our initial focus for a mission within this SDG has been around loneliness and human connection. And we've already kicked off one mission project in ShareThyme that I mentioned earlier, and Harry will take us through that later. The next SDG that we are focused on is number 10, Reduced Inequalities. And this mission is within this SDG is focused on social mobility. And we've already kicked off the mission project for that as well. It's currently underway. And this is actually in partnership with ESMA, the Employers Social Mobility Alliance, and the Positive Transformation Initiative. And we hope to launch that in an event in September, probably at a Positive Transformation Initiative event. In November, we'll be looking at number 9, so industry, innovation and infrastructure. This mission will be focused on the circular economy, and we'll be kicking off experiments to work on ways and in areas in which we can break the traditional linear economy of make, use and dispose, which results in so much waste in the world. And then finally, next February, we hope to launch a mission related to SDG number 11, sustainable cities and communities. And this hasn't been finalised yet because it's some way off, but we think this will focus on urban safety, particularly on how we might make cities safer for women. So we're using these territories as a guide to help us launch mission projects. And Red Badger will bring our digital innovation and product thinking expertise to bear on attacking the missions in the form of digital proof of concepts and innovation experiments. We will then facilitate the formation of coalitions of business leaders and other actors across different organisations to take responsibility for specific missions. And this is where this community comes in. We want leaders from different backgrounds, organisations, sectors, and even borders to work together in the service of the missions. And to make this a success, we will also need actors across many sectors to collaborate, from government to civil society, including charities and academia. And we'll also invite other like-minded digital companies similar to Red Badger into the community, because having the right expertise and an open, collaborative and transparent community will be key to achieving the impact that we need. So once we have that in place, The validated proof of concepts will then be incubated into the coalitions who will be tasked with finding an owner for the proof of concept to help take the proof of concepts into impact at scale and to work together on the mission as a whole. And they might create new missions under the grand challenge that they're working within. So with Red Badge's expertise in rapid digital product innovation and the collective might and diverse thinking of the coalitions, I believe we could really contribute to having social impact at scale. So a key part of this being success will be the power of diverse thinking from having coalitions that I discussed earlier that are formed from business leaders and other actors from different backgrounds. And who better to inspire us than Matthew Syed, who we're very happy to have with us today. He's an incredibly inspiring thought leader in the diversity space. He's also a broadcaster and best-selling author of books such as Black Box Thinking, Bounce, and more recently, Rebel Ideas. And I actually read Rebel Ideas late last year, and it's inspired me in many ways. So how diversity can enhance collective intelligence, its importance for creativity, the generation of ideas and innovation really hit home with me. And actually it's directly resulted in me changing the composition of Red Badge's own advisory board to be more cognitively diverse. So Matthew is an expert on mindset, diversity, innovation, and team performance. Today, he'll be talking to us about the power of diverse thinking. Matthew, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Cain. Great to be with everyone this morning. What a wonderful project to be at the launch of. And my brief really is over the next half an hour to talk about innovation in a big picture sense. And I'll be talking a little bit about the two themes that Cain mentioned in his introduction, rapid prototyping, failing fast on the one hand, and then having the capacity to leverage diverse ideas to create outsized innovation. But if I may, can I just start with this branch of modern psychological research, where different cohorts of people have been given a questionnaire to probe the way they think about innovation and high performance. And this diagnostic has been given to software designers, to NASA systems engineers, to retailers, to lawyers. I gave a version of it to my co-host on a BBC podcast, Robbie Savage. It's been given to other Premier League footballers. And broadly speaking, in answer to this question, how do you get high performance and innovation? You get two categories of answer. Over here in what's sometimes called the fixed mindset, people say, well, to be really good at my job or to innovate effectively, it's about having talent, having the right predisposition, the right sort of genetic inheritance, the right kind of brain in order to excel. And if you want to have a successful team, organization, or coalition, you need to hire people of that ilk. And I think perhaps most of us would agree that this conception isn't completely false. Talent is a real phenomenon that explains some of the variation we see in performance in most areas of human activity. And if you can identify talent, it makes sense to hire for it or to seek it out. But over here, in what's sometimes called the growth mindset, people say, whilst talent isn't irrelevant, in a complex, rapidly changing world, a world of disruption, it isn't enough. It's what we do with our talents. And people in this mindset are much more likely to focus on these other ingredients that are implicated in high performance and innovative change, like constant evaluation, like reaching out to diverse others to come up with novel solutions, and the recognition that however good I am, even if I'm a bit of a genius, I can nevertheless get better at what I do. And this, I think, has profound psychological significance because it enables people to do something that can be challenging, for some people almost threatening, namely learning from mistakes, from errors, and to use a slightly inelegant term, from suboptimality in all of its various guises. Now, what's interesting about this psychological research is that having figured out where people sit on this spectrum between fixed on the one hand and growth on the other, you can measure the behavior. And according to randomized double-blind controlled trials, the most rigorous form of scientific inference, the behavior turns out to be radically different. And one of my early pitches to you in my time this morning is that understanding the power of a growth mindset culture has massive implications for how organizations innovate, how coalitions innovate, and how societies innovate. But how to bring to life these two mindsets, fixed on the one hand, growth on the other. I might use, if I may, Cain, a tech example, and we'll think about the modern history of Microsoft, which, as you know, has had 3 chief executives in its 40-plus year history. The first, the co-founder, was Bill Gates. The second CEO, as all of you will know, was Steve Ballmer. The current CEO is slightly less well known. He took over in 2014, but since he took over, the market capitalization of the business, the equity value, has gone up by around $1 trillion. So an extraordinary transformation in the performance of Microsoft. And the CEO is Satya Nadella, who I've got to know very well personally, because I think it's really interesting journalistically to deconstruct how these transformations happen. And the first time I met Satya was in London a couple of years ago. And he said, it's very simple. When I became chief executive of Microsoft, my number one priority was to change the culture from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. He said, Microsoft had had all of this historic success, and we got complacent. We became an organization, in his words, of know-it-alls. Everyone wanted to look like the smartest person in the room. Now, if you want to look like the smartest person in the room, what's the last thing you want to hear about? You don't hear about the deficiencies in the product line. You don't hear about the failures. You don't hear about the errors. You don't want to hear about what other companies are doing better, because instead of seeing that as an opportunity to learn and pivot to something better still, you see that as a threat to your self-image as the smartest person out there. You don't want to see what other industries are doing to solve similar problems for the same underlying psychological reason. Can you see how when you have a critical mass of leaders in a fixed mindset, it suppresses the bottom-up flow of creativity and innovation that is so important for rational, evidence-based change? And he said, we need to change the culture from a fixed mindset culture of know-it-alls to a growth mindset culture of learn-it-alls. Admittedly, the language is a bit naff. However, when you're a learn-it-all, you want to know where the errors are. You want to know where the suboptimality resides. You see this not as a threat to your self-image as an expert who knows everything already, but as an opportunity to pivot, to adapt and innovate. Nadella's pitch is that the transformation at Microsoft was not consequential upon a change in talent, but a change in the culture, the psychological environment in which people were operating. They were more willing to take these early risks, to rapid prototype, to beta test, to get pieces of software into the market, get feedback from early adopters so they could iterate in the light of what they were learning. They were willing to look at other industries and other companies. The entire mindset of the organization changed. And I think this is a convincing explanation because it maps directly into what the randomized controlled trial evidence is saying and so many different kinds of historical precedents. So getting that growth mindset culture, getting into that mindset of innovation in a complex world, I think is fundamentally important. And I think it's doable. Practical tools that Nadella used, I think, are scalable to most organizations. But I want to just pivot into this other ingredient that I think is important, particularly in the context of what we're talking about this morning, which is the importance of diversity, which is often talked about today in demographic terms, if that makes sense. Differences in race and gender and social class and religious background. I'm going to focus what remain of my remarks on cognitive diversity, differences in insight and perspective and information, and the different models and heuristics that we implicitly deploy to make sense of the world around us. That's worth saying there is an overlap between these two things, demographic diversity on the one hand and cognitive diversity on the other, in most areas of human activity. So if, for example, you are putting together a team to come up with an advertising campaign, connect with a very broad demographic of consumers, is it fair to say that if everybody in the creative team were white, male, middle class, private school educated, Oxbridge graduates, it's not inconceivable that they may miss opportunities to connect this campaign with that demographic whose lives are very different from their own? Hopefully we can take that as read, doesn't need any more deconstructing. So the reason that demographic diversity contributes to cognitive diversity is our experiences often inform the way we make sense of the world and the way we filter it. But I want to suggest that there are other contexts where the overlap between demographic diversity on the one hand and cognitive diversity on the other is less significant. So imagine if you were putting a team together to come up with creative ideas or to design an aircraft engine. And let's assume that, I mean, if I can tell you a little bit about my background, I'm mixed race. I'm half Pakistani, half Welsh. It's quite an unusual background. I'll be interested during the discussion if anybody shares it. But the fact that I'm mixed race and I had experience of growing up in 1980s UK as a mixed race person isn't necessarily going to give me any germane insights into how tweaking the design of that engine might improve its aerodynamic efficiency. So a second pitch to you is that the concept of diversity shouldn't be reduced to a box ticking exercise. It's much more complex and sophisticated than that. So the question perhaps is, how do we optimize true cognitive diversity? And here I want to get straight into what Cain's been talking about, of innovation in the generation of creative ideas. And I'll put a straightforward conceptual point your way, which is, if you imagine putting together a team to come up with brilliant ideas for the next 5 years of a particular strategy or to inform a particular objective. And let's say everybody in this creative team is genuinely innovative, and each of them comes up with 10 genuinely brilliant ideas. So you have 10 people in the team, each one of whom has come up with 10 genuinely brilliant ideas. My question to you is, how many genuinely brilliant ideas do you have in total? Now, I would have thought, hearing that question, the answer is 100, 10 times 10. But of course, if this team are cognitively homogeneous, if they think in the same way and come up with the same ideas as one another, you might only have 10. If, on the other hand, they're cognitively diverse and come up with different ideas from one another, then you could have 100. This, I think, is quite interesting because each member of these two teams is of equal ability in terms of their creative idea generation. They're all coming up with 10 ideas. And yet one of the two teams is almost 1,000% more creative. If the HR function is hiring on individual ability, it will be slightly bewildered as to this contrast. It's only by taking a step back and looking not just at individual ability, but meaningful cognitive differences that you can account for this extraordinary uplift in creative idea generation. Now, creative ideas, when you can improve the volume of them, it obviously helps a great deal. But what's even more important is that it facilitates a greater capacity to recombine ideas. And this is why I want to talk a little bit more about the underlying basis of innovation in the modern world. I've sort of touched on one aspect of innovation earlier in the talk on rapid prototyping, learning from mistakes. A classic example, all of you will be very familiar with this. James Dyson coming up with the idea of a dual cyclone vacuum cleaner, creating the dimensions of the cyclone in order to rotate the dust in air to create centripetal force so that the mass of the dust particles increases many times and it drops out. The original prototype didn't work very effectively. Some of the dust was coming through, so he had to tweak the dimensionality. And after he tweaked and tweaked and tweaked, he started having a problem with long strands of hair. Not an issue that we have in my bedroom. So he had to tweak it again. And this idea of rapid prototyping, putting propositions to the empirical world and adjusting one's understanding of the engineering or software problem in the light of what one learns, is obviously centrally important to the way we think about innovation, particularly in technology. But there's some very interesting trends that have been happening in innovation, particularly in the last decade, but also over the last 50 years, which is the growth of the significance of what's called recombinant innovation. This is taking not one idea and iterating it to make it more effective, but taking two disparate ideas and combining them to create a novel solution to an old problem. So if you think about perhaps the best example from human history is two very ancient technologies. On the one hand, wheels, which have existed in human society for a few thousand years and are very useful in terms of transportation. And the invention of the wheel, of course, was a seminal moment in the history of our species. Another technology that we've had for a very long time is luggage. So humans have been using animal skins and other things of that kind to carry things around. So you have these two separate technologies coexisting in human societies for many thousands of years, each being improved within their specific silo. So there's iteration. If you look at the fossil record and the quality of the wheel through time, it's quite slow, but nevertheless, society started improving the wheel with axles, different types of material and so on. And there's also been iteration and change in the fossil record and beyond in the use of luggage for different types of problem. But you know what I'm coming to, because it took until 1972 to combine these two ideas in a single new technology, which of course is the wheeled suitcase. Anybody of my age or older, I don't know how many people on the call are in that demographic, but I used to, in my early table tennis days, would carry this huge bag made by Ascot, and we'd go through transit, and it was extraordinarily heavy. Because this technology hadn't diffused very fast. So in the 1980s, certainly the early 1980s, people used to really struggle with incredibly heavy bags, and people would get backache. In 1972, a guy called Bernard Sadow was traveling through Asia in an airport, and he could see all these people heaving their luggage around. And he said, what about putting wheels on a suitcase? And so you had the combination of these two technologies creating a solution that obviously has completely transformed the market for retail luggage. What's interesting is it's very easy to get siloed, and therefore to think within the perimeters of one particular specialism about how we might make tweaks and improvements. And that's important. But it means that there may be missing the opportunity to reach out to disparate people with different ideas to see how recombination might happen. Now, if you look at the patent catalogue, in the 19th century, most innovation was iterative. It was tweaking within an existing code of the catalogue. Over the last few decades, this has transformed dramatically in that almost all of the high quality hit patents are now recombinant innovations that are combining different codes within the patent catalogue. If you also look at scientific innovation, there's a great database of scientific papers called the Web of Science. And if you look at the early history of the production of scientific papers, it was often individual scientists working within a particular intellectual milieu, a particular academic subject, and they would be coming up with new ideas from within the subject. Today, almost all of the hit papers are recombinant. They involve teams of scientists, but these teams are not working within a single subject silo, like, for example, evolutionary biology. They cross-cut different academic disciplines. So you're creating the recombination of ideas, what my colleague at the Times, Matt Ridley, calls ideas having sex, which is quite an evocative term. In fact, I mean, those of you who are interested in sort of sciencey things, you might think about these things as, you know, iterative innovation is a bit like natural selection, a particular genotype being tested in each generation and adapting in the light of what the external environment is forcing upon the gene pool. So you get this incremental change through time. Recombinant innovation is really like sexual recombination. This is the genes from two different organisms coming together. And this, of course, creates a massive uplift in the speed of biological evolution, because then otherwise it would be so difficult to get all of the genes that make eyes together in just the one organism. And I think, as I mentioned, one of the problems is it's very easy to get siloed, to get stuck in a particular category and therefore not realize the opportunities that are out there. So one of the things I love about this platform is it's inviting people to have their depth of expertise but to take a step beyond the borders, beyond the boundaries, to look out, where are the people who I might potentially interact with, who could give me an insight that is going to transform the way I think about my problem, and who I could probably help in some way or another transform the way they think about their problem, or how we can think about shared problems. Now, one, if I can just, obviously quite a lot of conceptual stuff there. So let me tell a quick story, if I may. I advise a people, one called Gareth Southgate and another called Philip Neville, and they are football coaches. Gareth Southgate coaches the England men's football team, and Philip Neville coaches the England women's football team. And it was quite interesting when I joined this group because it was very eclectic. In the group, we had a guy called Dave Brailsford, who's a cycling coach, and Lucy Giles, who runs the Sandhurst Military Training Academy, and Stuart Lancaster's a rugby coach, and Manoj Badali, who's a British Asian founder of high-tech startups, and Sir Michael Barber, who is a educationalist, and Sue Campbell, who is involved in Olympic sport. And at the beginning, a lot of football journalists said this is a ridiculous group to be advising on football. Harry Redknapp knows more about football than Matthew Syed. Tony Pulis has probably forgotten more about football than Lucy Giles will ever know. And of course, that is true. Harry Redknapp has more knowledge on football, and Tony Pulis has more knowledge on football. But can you see the problem when you bring people like that together in a group or a platform or forum to figure out how to improve football performance? Is Southgate and Neville already know what Redknapp and Pulis know? They were socialized into the same assumptions of English football, a way of setting up tactically, a way of recovering, a way of doing diet. What you get in a situation like that is just they're mirroring each other the whole time. They're agreeing, they're becoming more confident about potentially gravely flawed ideas. What's been interesting about this group is when Brailsford comes up with something not known to other people in the group, like, for example, how big data sets in diet can help to personalize the diet for a particular athlete. And then you're suddenly getting or when Lucy Giles talks about how the military solves the problem of getting people ready to perform under pressure in theatre. You're suddenly getting the cross-pollination of ideas. You're getting divergent thinking. This is where you get the uplift in collective intelligence. It's where you get this uplift in innovation. But of course, the psychological irony that underpins everything that I've said over the last 10 or 15 minutes is that we are comfortable when we're surrounded with people who think just like us. It makes us feel smarter when people are telling us things we already know. It validates our assumptions and worldview. The pleasure centers of our brains light up when people are mirroring our perspective. So there is a fundamental unconscious tendency in human groups, senior leadership teams, for people to gravitate towards the like-minded. These individuals can be highly intelligent, but they can be collectively stupid because each one of these brains is adding nothing to the other. They're just replicating what's already known. And given that one is trying to solve complex problems, I mean, that doesn't matter with a simple problem, by the way. If it's a really simple problem, you just need one brain and one perspective. You don't need a team. As soon as a problem reaches some minimum threshold of complexity, or particularly when one is going into the innovative space, where one's trying to find out what is currently not known, because if one knows the result of an experiment before one conducts it, it isn't an experiment. That's where you need the diversity. And so my genuine sense is that over the next 20 to 50 years, the fundamental criterion of success is going to be leveraging these two deep insights of group dynamics, growth mindset on the one hand, and true cognitive diversity on the other, to create this massive uplift in the speed of innovation and the extent of the collective intelligence of the group. And let me finish, if I may, with one story of great historical significance, which I think really brings to life both themes that I've talked about so far this morning. And it's about Bletchley Park. Bletchley Park. Because most of you will know about Bletchley Park, the team that cracked the Enigma code. And this was a seminal event in the Second World War. It probably shortened the war by 2 to 3 years. Some historians think it actually changed the outcome of the war. Now, if you are hiring great code breakers, if you're anything like me, I guess you're thinking great mathematicians and number crunchers. And they did hire some great mathematicians, including, of course, Alan Turing and Peter Twin and others of that kind. But on January the 12th, 1942, the Daily Telegraph organized a crossword competition. A reader had written to the editor saying the crosswords have gotten too easy. I can solve them in less than 10 minutes. And the editor was slightly skeptical about this. He didn't think it was possible to solve the crossword in less than 10 minutes under controlled conditions. He said, if anyone thinks they can, we'll organize a competition, and anyone who succeeds, we will make a donation of £100 to charity, which was a lot of money in 1942. So on January the 12th, 30 would-be crossword enthusiasts congregated on Fleet Street on the newsroom floor of the Daily Telegraph. One of these people was Stanley Sedgwick, who was a lowly accountancy clerk who learned to do the Telegraph crossword in his daily commute in from the suburbs. And he performed brilliantly on the day. For those who are interested, it's just over 10 minutes, but he performed brilliantly. What Sedgwick didn't know, and what the editor of the Daily Telegraph didn't know, nor any of the other competitors, is that one of the observers on that day was from the British Secret Intelligence Service. And a week later, Sedgwick got a letter in the post saying, we would like to see you on a matter of supreme national urgency. He was quite surprised when he got this letter. Because what Bletchley Park quintessentially understood is that the only way to solve a complex multi-dimensional problem is with cognitive diversity. A group of Alan Turings, however individually talented, would have been collectively incapable of solving the problem. And it turns out that crossword enthusiasts have something critical in common with code breakers. They bring something distinctive to that particular problem, which is that they are very good quasi-mind readers, which may sound a bit odd, but each national newspaper has about 5 crossword setters. And the really good crossword solvers are able to identify the setter from the first 1 or 2 clues and therefore efficiently anticipate what's coming up to solve the problem. It turns out that that ability to get into the mind of somebody else is very important in code breaking, because the people inputting into the Enigma machines are supposed to put the letters in randomly, but doing again and again under pressure, they would do it in patterns, like the first 3 letters of a girlfriend's name or the first 3 letters of a swear word. Sedgwick was brilliant at getting into the minds of the operators, and he worked in Hut 10, which intercepted the weather Enigma, very important for Bomber Command, but these also operated as cribs for the naval Enigma. And that was the toughest Enigma to crack. They had 2 independent layers of encryption, but cracking that turned out to be critical for winning the Battle of the Atlantic. Turing would never have been able to do that. A team of Alan Turings would have been individually talented and collectively hopeless. And what Bletchley Park understood is that cognitive diversity was also informed by demographic diversity. More than half the people working at Bletchley Park were women. Mavis Beatty, a brilliant lateral thinker, figured out that 2 of the Enigma operators had girlfriends called Rosa. They were cultural historians, linguists, and philosophers. This wasn't cognitive diversity for the sake of it. It was precision engineered to maximize a collective intelligence related to the problem of code breaking. This is what I want to leave you with. It has to be context dependent. If me and Brailsford and Stuart Lancaster, Manoj Badal, Lucy Giles, Sue Campbell were advising not on football, but how to design a hadron collider, you would have a cognitively diverse group that would be offering no insights of any relevance. This group, however, does have insights that are relevant to football. So there are an arsenal of tools that can be used to maximize cognitive diversity relevant to the problem. The cognitive diversity that ones need in the law is different to tech, which is different to football, which is different to theoretical physics. This is the gap in our current understanding of how to solve complex problems. We understand how to get people of individual ability, but not how to maximize the collective intelligence of human groups. And that, I think, is one of the great opportunities of this platform, and why I am very grateful to be part of this launch today. Thank you very much, and I hand back.
Matthew, thank you very much for that. That was awesome. Really, really interesting. Loved hearing about the FA Advisory Board and the Enigma machine. And the uplifting creative ideas from a cognitively diverse group versus a homogenous group is absolutely fascinating. So I'm sure that's inspired the audience today. Matthew will be staying with us till the end. And we'll be doing a Q&A shortly in about 10 minutes. And I can already see that we've got some great questions from the audience. But next, we're going to move into the prove section of the event. And Harry, a Red Badger product director, will be taking you through ShareThyme. And as I mentioned earlier before, ShareThyme is a proof of concept that we built in just 8 days and have since tested it in the wild for several months since. And then having validated the idea, it's now ready to scale, and the first coalition has already started to form to take it into the next phase. So Harry can tell us more. Harry, over to you.
Thank you, Cain. That's a very difficult act to follow. Thank you, Matthew, for your insight. That was amazing. Hi, everybody. So I think when it comes down to it, one of the biggest challenges with addressing some of the world's biggest problems is, where do you even begin? And often that's the biggest blocker to get over, because we believe the problem is so large that no idea or initiative will have a significant impact on what we're trying to achieve. However, it's an unfounded belief. You know, many small initiatives are able to deliver incremental value fast and begin to chip away at some of these challenges. And an example of this is our social value platform, ShareThyme, which I'm going to talk about, which led us up to our first mission around human connection and loneliness. As Cain mentioned, it's very much aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which is about ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all at all ages. So although globally major progress is being made in increasing life expectancy and quality of life through better access to healthcare, this by itself is not without its own challenges. And the importance of human connection shouldn't be underestimated. Fundamentally, we're all inherently social animals, but modern ways of living often reduce the quantity and quality of our social relationships. As a result, loneliness is seen by many as one of the largest health concerns we face today, and something we were really passionate about addressing with our first mission. It's really shocking, actually, when you start to review the facts around loneliness. Did some research and was staggered to learn that loneliness is as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, worse for you than being obese, makes you more likely to suffer from dementia, heart disease, and depression, and ultimately increases your risk of death by 29%. The issue of loneliness can affect anyone, but it is a particular issue in the elderly. According to the Red Cross, in the UK, there are 9 million people who would consider themselves always or often lonely, and 4 million of them are over the age of 65. In the UK, as we know, we have an ageing population, and this issue is only going to become larger in the next few years, and it's been exacerbated by coronavirus. So much so that the government has listed the ageing society as one of their grand challenges in their industrial strategy. The reason many people, particularly over the age of 65, find constant loneliness hard to overcome is because they lack in friendship and support networks, and are less able to meet people and create new connections, particularly in our current world. When we started thinking about ways we could impact this sustainable development goal, we identified loneliness early on as something close to our hearts and a sensitive topic that we wanted to address. So we started thinking, was there a way we could use technology to alleviate or even solve this problem? Speed to impact was our focus, and even with a very limited amount of time, it's actually amazing what can be achieved. I think, you know, taking some of the principles that Matthew talked about earlier, we have a rapid validation approach, and we went from 150 ideas to a live prototype, bringing people together through our intergenerational cooking platform, ShareThyme, in just 8 days. The concept of ShareThyme is very, very simple. It's a platform that connects older people who love to cook with younger people who want to learn new recipes. Older people sign up as a teacher and create a profile like this one, and younger people are able to browse teachers and their recipes and request a cooking session. So we came up with the idea, but obviously that's just an idea at that point. So we want to go and test it, and we tested it with the general public and received an overwhelming response. And we built and launched a proof of concept, as I said, in 8 days, and began running cooking sessions between pairs of younger and older people. Cooking really does bring people together. The feedback and stories we've heard from running these sessions has been inspirational. From Denny, a grandmother who hadn't cooked with anyone since her children had left home, to Kate's delight in discovering the number of things in common with someone 30 years her senior. These stories have only motivated us to continue and shape the proposition further. And we want to improve and grow the platform. We've also been picked up by the press, and to date we've been featured in the BBC, in the Telegraph and in Design Week magazine, and we've been voted a world-changing idea by Fast Company. It's amazing how something so small can have impact. But what's next? I mean, the positive feedback and the recognition that we've got is great, but it's only motivated us to continue. So our goal is to create more human connections and bring 1,000 people together across 30 countries and provide older people with 1,500 hours time spent cooking. However, we originally designed the ShareThyme cooking experience to be in person, which is pretty hard in the current climate. So we need to start thinking about how we facilitate remote cooking sessions. Just due to the audience, this will require some fundamental changes of the platform and careful consideration of user experience, particularly for people who may be less tech savvy. As we continue to grow the platform, we need partners and support to help drive awareness, to expand the platform itself, and ultimately we want to reach the most lonely people in society. So if you're interested in understanding how you can get involved in ShareThyme, or equally if you have any recombinant ideas to support this initiative, we'd love to hear from you. So ShareThyme is just one example of many, perhaps, of how we can begin chipping away at the mission to create meaningful human connections and impact wellbeing at all ages. If nothing else, coronavirus has rapidly changed the world we live in, and it's taught us all that we need to be able to respond in days, not months. So we want to do more to have impact at scale. We know we can make things happen quickly, and we know that we can have impact, but we really want to learn from like-minded individuals that share our passion and from industry experts. And we want to co-create new ideas to impact this mission further. I'd like to introduce my colleague Andreas, who's actually another product director at Red Badger, but he's going to talk about how you can get involved. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Harry, and hello. Now I will tell you about our vision for the coalitions. We will invite participants and create human connections across organizations, including some of our competitors, across sectors, connecting public and private, and borders, because we believe that diverse perspectives are key for creating positive impact in the real world. We look to shape coalitions as dynamic and action-oriented working groups. In the coalitions, we look to connect the thinkers with the doers, work with human-centered perspective, and fast experimentation in the real world, like you've seen in ShareThyme. We like to get stuff done and create positive impact at scale, reaching as many people as possible. To enable this, we need your help. We look for purpose-driven business leaders who work with us and shape the coalitions. We look for support in the form of time from you as leaders, and support with resources to incubate successful mission projects like ShareThyme in your organizations. We look for subject matter experts who help us get insights into the different facets of the grand challenges, and participants might come from government, civil society, charities, or academia, who will contribute their own unique point of views to the collective intelligence of the group. I'm really curious who will be our crossword decryptor. Who do we find who contributes like the unique extra part to our group? Really looking forward to exploring that. And to expand our network, we have already set up a partnership with PTI. That's a Positive Transformation Initiative that brings together an impressive network of over 200 purpose-driven business leaders. And I'm very excited to tap into this group. So how does this look in practice? To focus on specific mission areas, we consult our subject matter experts and we run short sprints to find out where and how we might create impact. In the Health and Wellbeing Coalition, we have kicked off our first 2-week sprint this week. The focus is on tackling health inequalities in primary school-aged kids. And we have kids, so that's an area that I feel great urgency and passion about. As we start to run the coalitions, We're going to live by the test and learn, or learn it all mindset, and see what works and discover what we can do better. How we create and deliver the coalitions and the mission projects, how we incubate them successfully, how we track and measure our impact against the missions, and how the coalition teams work together effectively and with joy. Health and well-being is just one of 4 coalitions we set up to work towards the SDGs. And we look forward to working with you if you're up for a good challenge and make change happen in the world around us. I will now hand back to Cain, who will tell you more about the next steps. Over to you, Cain.
Thank you, Harry and Andreas. That was great. So today you will have been introduced to the Mission Beyond model. You would have heard and seen how proof of concepts and innovation projects can be the catalyst for change. You'll have heard that to have impact at scale, you need to form diverse coalitions of cross-organisation and cross-sector collaboration. And you will have heard from Matthew, which is an excellent talk. Thank you, Matthew, about why the power of diverse thinking is so important for innovation. So, and all of this is in the service of tackling grand challenges and having societal impact in general. So it's our intention following this event to set up one-to-one meetings and small roundtables to gauge your interest in Mission Beyond and the SDGs, and also to gather feedback on how coalitions might work. It's very organic and it's growing, and we want your help to be able to make it better. So as a next step, Red Badger will be reaching out to you individually, so do expect us to be in contact in the next couple of weeks. Now to wrap up, we've got some time for some Q&A. We've already got some good questions that I can see. We've got Matthew with us until 12:15, so we'll cover his questions first, and then if you have questions for myself, Andreas, Harry, we can carry on after 12:15. So Mara and Sean, as I mentioned earlier, will be facilitating the Q&A. So over to you, Mara and Sean.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers, and thank you, Matthew. As expected, we have loads of questions on the subject of cognitive diversity. So I'll start off with the first one from Hebzi, who's asking whether there is a risk of companies using cognitive diversity to avoid addressing social inequalities and having truly representative leadership.
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, there is a risk of that. One of the reasons I wrote Rebel Ideas, which goes into the concept of cognitive diversity, innovation and change in some detail, is because my sense is that the diversity agenda was failing. And it was failing for a number of reasons. I went to an HR conference where an HR executive was at the front saying, you need to diversify the workforce. If you diversify the workforce, it won't just be morally good, but it will also improve performance. And this was stated as a matter of objective truth. And a slightly awkward person at the back put their hand up and said, imagine I'm a coach of a sprint relay team at the Olympic Games. And my team is comprised of Usain Bolt and 3 other Usain Bolt clones. There is no diversity at all. There's no diversity of gender, no diversity of, I mean, these are clones, and yet I have the 4 fastest runners in the world. If I diversified that team, I would inevitably be bringing in slower runners. That isn't going to improve my probability of winning the Olympic Games. It seemed to me that was an entirely valid objection to what the HR director was saying. When it comes to simple tasks, cognitive diversity doesn't contribute to performance. It doesn't contribute to performance with bricklaying. The productivity of 3 bricklayers is effectively, with a few give and takes, just a simple sum of the creativity of its individual members. So a lot of people feel that diversity undermines the concept of meritocracy. The interesting thing is this intuition turns out to be false when one changes from linear and simple activities to complex activities. That's when diversity really begins to make a difference. And the only way to get people to buy into improving diversity is if they think it's going to, largely, if they think it's going to improve the bottom line. And positioning it as a performance issue, given that demographic diversity is often so important for cognitive diversity, I think it will bring that additional demographic diversity, which, as you imply in the question, is so important for issues of morality and social justice.
Fantastic, thank you so much. We have two related questions from Alistair and Jack. What steps should business leaders take to foster cognitive diversity through current recession? And what are the kind of like practical tips to move from fixed mindset to growth mindset?
Well, those are very good questions. Thank you. So when it comes to moving from fixed to growth, can I give you two very practical things, one on growth mindset, one on diversity. So it'll give you an insight into what the culture was like at Microsoft when Nadella took over, that when he told his senior leadership team on their first retreat that his number one objective was creating this growth mindset culture rather than a fixed mindset culture. A few members of his senior leadership team came to him and said, yeah, we need to find the 5 people in a fixed mindset and sack them. And Nadella was like, no, this was not the point of what I was trying to do. What he wanted to, effectively what he did is he said, right, this is my number one objective. Growth mindset is now the number one value in the organization. And I'm going to get you, my senior leadership team, to take the diagnostic tool. Let's measure where we are with mindset. And this diagnostic tool gives a report, and it gives people an opportunity to do something that they don't often do, which is self-reflection. Because almost everyone thinks intuitively they're in a growth mindset. If you take the person in your organization who is the most status quo orientated, who hates to collaborate, who's done things in the same way for the last 20 years, and you say, are you in a growth mindset? They'll say, yeah, I am actually, very much so. What this report does, it gives them an opportunity to say, you know what? Maybe I have done things in the same way for a long time. Maybe I do get defensive where people point out my weaknesses. Maybe I do find it difficult to collaborate with diverse voices because it challenges my own worldview. Maybe I could think in a more creative way about the way I lead, about the way I do my job. That's a great way of beginning the shift, taking the diagnostic, self-reflecting and going through that journey as an individual. But he followed it up with town halls and a range of other things, which helped to shift 120,000 people distributed around the world to what I think is a really enriching growth mindset culture. Talk about that in some more depth. On the issue of cognitive diversity, I think the question's picked up on the fact that you can't measure it in the abstract because it all depends on the context. Remember the example of the group advising the football coaches were cognitively diverse and useful, but in another context would be cognitively diverse and completely redundant. So one tool that can be used, we've done this with FTSE 100 companies with some really great results, is you get people to sit down in the senior leadership team and to write down who are the voices we're not hearing from. Where is the Stanley Sedgwick? Where is that particular piece of the jigsaw that we haven't catered for so far? Get them to think creatively. It may be an age thing. It may be that everyone is middle-aged, and it might be that a younger person with a different perspective on young aspirations or a way young people connect with technology might be quite important. It may be a gender issue that needs to be addressed, because of course diversity in gender can be massively important in all sorts of different ways, but it may be to do with intellectual or professional background. Maybe we need somebody with an understanding of machine learning in this group, because at the moment, because one of the problems with senior leadership teams is they can, to go back to the first question, is they can often look diverse demographically, but have no cognitive diversity. You've seen this in professional services. You know, I've given talks to boards of directors of professional services companies, and they all think, they've been there so long that they think in the same way. They use the same historical precedents to reason through problems, the same metaphors. They're kind of identikit thinking, and they're missing the big picture. When you get people to have the discipline to sit down and write down where are the voices we're missing, post them on a notice board, get them to vote to take these ideas to the next level, you start to surface where the cognitive diversity is missing in that context. And it can make a massive difference to the collective intelligence of the group by bringing 2 or 3 voices in that can disrupt usefully the monolithic perspective of the extant group.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And would you say that's the good way of kind of like mitigating the tendency to align with the group norms and kind of like, you know, follow what the top management is saying?
Well, this is so really one might, that's a great question, because one might think of this as a two-stage problem. The fundamental question, and I noticed, is there anyone, Cain, on the call from financial services or banking or?
Yes, there's loads of them.
Okay. This is quite interesting. I think the most, if you're interested in making good forecasts and predictions, and I maybe should have built this into the speech, so apologies that I didn't do so, but you can get a sense of the scale of the uplift in the quality and performance of a group by thinking about forecasting or making good predictions. The reason I don't mention it is people get bored by this particular area of human activity, but it is really important because any judgment contains an empirical hypothesis of one kind or another. If you've decided to tune in this morning rather than going for a walk, you've implicitly predicted you're better off, you're going to gain more from tuning in. So every judgment has a prediction built in. Why do some people make better predictions than others? The best research on this was by Jack Soll of Duke University. He took the top 258 economic forecasters in the world and he measured their track record. It was a bell-shaped distribution, a Gaussian distribution, as you would expect. And the most accurate forecaster was about 5% more accurate than an average forecaster. So nothing terribly surprising so far. But then he put the top 6 forecasters in what you might call a nominal team, and he took their collective judgment by taking the average of their forecasts. Now, in a simple activity like running, like the Usain Bolt case, if you take the time of the fastest runner and compare that time with the time of the average of the top 6 runners in a race, what is faster? The time of the fastest runner or the time of the average of the top 6? Cain, what is faster? He wasn't listening properly, so he might not have
the fastest runner.
Has to be faster, has to be, unless it's a dead heat, in which case they're both the same. But when Soll, thank you, Cain, when Soll compared the accuracy of the top forecaster with the accuracy of the average of the top 6, the average of the top 6 was more accurate, but not just a bit more accurate, not 2% or 5% or 10%, 15%. This is a staggeringly large effect. Why is there this effect? It's only because of cognitive diversity. When you combine the information contained in 6 models, you must have more information than is contained in any one model alone, even the most accurate model. Each of these models also contains errors and blind spot and biases. This is true, but the technique of averaging means that they filter out. Some are a bit higher than the eventual turnout of the oil price. Some are a bit lower. On aggregate, these cancel. So you're pooling the information and filtering the error. The interesting thing is that economic forecasters are often unaware of this property of collective judgments. Moreover, they tend to like to work with people who use the same model as themselves, which means that it just shuts down their capacity to make wise forecasts. We're seeing the same problem in epidemiology. Was unaware of this before this particular problem, but you take the average of epidemiological forecasts, you get a better prediction than any one epidemiologist. But this is very counterintuitive because it seems like you're diluting the quality, but you're actually contributing quality when you have, by the way, the research in this area, it's called the wisdom of the crowds, has moved on dramatically in the last 15 years. And optimizing the wisdom of small crowds is now, in my view, fundamental to the way private equity, hedge funds, and investment banks and all other organizations operate. But I want to leave you with this thought. If you could take and clone the most accurate forecaster in the world, you hire the most accurate forecaster in the world, and you clone that person and put 6 of them in the team, every member of your team is more accurate than any member of any other team in the world. In a sprint relay context, that's a great team. But we know from the Soll experiment that that team would be 15% less accurate than a more diverse team whose individual members are less accurate. Now, that's quite a lot to take in, and some of you will get this already, but this gives you a direct mathematical insight into the power of cognitive diversity and why it matters so much. That was a long answer, sorry. I promise the next one will be like no more than 38 seconds.
No problem, no problem. That's great. So another one. So we talk about kind of cognitive diversity within one organization and how that helps competitiveness. When we look at the grand challenges and things that we're trying to kind of like, with Mission Beyond address, such as reducing loneliness, which is, it's not a problem that one organization can solve. How does cognitive diversity help to address the kind of like cross-industry collaboration and kind of like thinking beyond just your own, organization and really starting to collaborate maybe with your competitors? And thanks, Barry, for that question.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Barry. Well, this is a great example because with a complex problem like loneliness, there's lots of different dimensions, as with all complex problems. And you often have organizations that are very good at understanding one part of that dimensionality, a different organization which will be understanding a different part of that, and another organization which will understand something else. Bringing these different organizations together to think about how they can combine their ideas is very important. Now, I want to say one other thing, which is, again, going to sound slightly conceptual, but it's very important. When it comes to making predictions, taking the average of independent forecasts is a great way of getting an accurate forecast. This is not a good way of coming up with a good solution to a problem, because you could have two different potential solutions, and when you try and average them, it's incoherent. This is where you get the problem of a camel is a horse designed by committee. With problem solving, you don't want to necessarily take averages, but you still need these diverse groups or diverse organizations coming together, because they can begin to share information, number one, but also the different proposed solutions often operate as ways of nudging the overall group to wiser and more innovative solutions. So even though in prediction you can mathematically measure the uplift in intelligence of 15%, you get the same effect in problem solving. It's just that it's more difficult to provide a precise mathematical estimate because it slightly varies from context to context. But this is precisely an area where you want cognitive diversity.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask one more question for you, Matthew, and then there's one question which I think could be interesting as a panel discussion. Are you in support of kind of like affirmative action to ensure greater cognitive diversity in kind of like management? And that question comes from David.
Hi, David. I am slightly torn on this, I have to say. On balance, I think I'm slightly skeptical about it. There were 2 or 3 randomized controlled trials that took place, effectively natural experiments, where there were gender quotas mandated for boards of directors, and they worked much less effectively than I think many of us were hoping. And one always ought to be guided by the evidence. And I think one of the reasons for this, and there's a number of different reasons, but one of the reasons is that when somebody comes into a board of directors and other people think that that person is there, not because of what they can bring, but because of their gender, their ideas tend to be downgraded and devalued. This can happen in quite a subtle way. It's interesting reading the evidence of the people, I think it was Norway, wasn't it, that mandated the boards, and there was just quite a clear correlation between those companies that had a greater uplift in the number of women on the board and what happened to equity value. I think that this works much better organically, but of course it can be slow organically unless, and this is the key point, unless companies truly understand why it matters, those new perspectives are valued and are used as part of the process of how these organizations improve. So I think one of the things they do very well at Bridgewater, you may not agree with everything they do there, but in the onboarding process is all about getting people to understand the value of diversity to making wiser decisions on behalf of the organization. And so there was a sort of an implication in one of the earlier questions. You say you get the right number of people, you get the right people in a room and it's diverse, but you have no real, let's say there's a leader in that group who doesn't value diversity and then gets punitive when people offer a slightly different view to the view offered by the leader. Can you see how that shuts down the expression of diverse opinions? People don't say what they think, they say what they think the leader wants to hear. So in addition to having a group of diverse individuals, you need a culture of diversity. A safe, psychological safety is a bit jargony, but it basically means where people feel they can say what they think. That's where you get this very dynamical interaction in meetings and other forums of that kind. When you get both of those things right, I think you get the best solutions. And that trying to, as it were, shortcut your way there with diversity quotas, I think can sometimes undermine the objective that I hope we're all seeking to achieve.
Excellent, thank you so much. We have 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask one more question to everyone, and maybe start with Harry. In the current kind of like remote working world, and this question comes from Natalie, how do we really encourage and embrace like innovation and creativity? Like, are we finding good ways of really embracing and cognitive diversity, creativity, really making the best use of our brain while not being together?
It's a great question, and it's much harder. We're at the moment, I think Andreas mentioned it, we're looking into health and well-being in primary school kids, and at the moment we're trying to run an innovation sprint around that, and actually finding information. There's so much out there on the internet and loads of studies and things like that, but finding people, cognitively diverse people from different backgrounds to speak to is much harder, because we are, rather than being able to go out on the streets and speak to people, we're much more inhibited by our ability to reach people to speak to through our own networks. And, you know, as Matthew mentioned previously, you know, we surround ourselves with people that are very similar to ourselves. So it is more of a challenge, but it just kind of spurs us on to, you know, start asking for introductions to more people, or, you know, getting in touch with people that we perhaps wouldn't have done before directly, to ask them for their advice and to reach their networks. So yeah, I mean, you need a rigorous process to do innovation properly. But as part of that, you need to have cognitively diverse opinions to help shape your ideas. So that's probably not the right answer. It's harder, but that is the fact. And we are learning a lot at the moment about how we approach future engagements like this.
Andreas, anything to add to that?
Yeah. So especially when it comes to innovation and creativity, it's quite ambiguous. So it's not, you cannot point to things with like well understood words that everybody understands in the same way. We try to find something new, right? So while this is the case, I feel like to create a safe space and trust in the group is like critical, which if people haven't worked together in the same room, we need to spend extra time to establish that. And because words can be quite ambiguous, these are moments where we normally would go to a whiteboard to sketch stuff out and say, oh, I would see that more here, or this on top of the other, or whatnot. That becomes very clear when we have boundary objects where we can draw things and have a visual representation of our thoughts. And we use digital tools for that, like Miro, for example, to fill that gap. And as well, because we are not in the same room, you need extra rituals to align on the roles and responsibilities, that we can move forward and actually take actions. Who does what? When do we do stuff? When I'm stuck, I reach out to help. That there are channels to facilitate that we can move forward at pace. All these things are easy when you're sitting in the same room. When everybody sits in their own room by themselves, we need to make sure the communication is open in the group, and we can work together effectively. So 3 thoughts on that.
Great. Cain, anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I mean, the process that we use with regard to how to innovate, test desirability, like, can be done digitally. So we do that digitally anyway. We kind of, Google is a great enabler for us to be able to test heat in the market for an idea. So there is still, although the human connection part of cognitive diversity in your tests is much harder to do, you know, there is still a huge amount that you can do in order to test, you know, desirability, feasibility, viability when it comes to leveraging digital to do it. And so, you know, it's not ideal being locked down, but actually it's not too much of an inhibitor to being able to innovate.
Matthew, any thoughts from you? How are you finding the remote world?
Thank you. I've just been reading through some of the Zoom webinar chat whilst listening to these very good answers. There are some absolutely fantastic questions and insight. I have to say, it's been a real pleasure. I mean, one thing I think about COVID, if I may say so. I mean, I think my sense is that there's been massive variation in the response from company to company and industry to industry. I think everyone was confused in the first week. I had lots of conversations with CEOs who were worried and anxious, and I was too. And I think all of us were deeply conscious that this was an unprecedented crisis. But I have seen, some law firms doubled down on what they've been doing. They're sticking by the billable hour. They think of client meetings in the same way. They're very resentful of what's happened. Others have been much more agile. They're using software to create information sharing within the group. They're looking to other industries to how they're solving similar problems. They're starting to reimagine their client interaction. They're slightly more on the curve of using machine learning to cut out errors of execution in the drafting of contracts. So I think there's and that's a massive growth mindset response. And you've got to remember the people who engage with me, they're quite self-selecting. They're often people who are very agile in this particular way and who I think are thinking in a very creative way about how they deal with the problems. In terms of the government response, I think you can see very clearly that SAGE lacked cognitive diversity. It was very dominated by mathematicians and modelers and clinical academics, but there weren't very many, or if any, public health professionals or frontline experts in communicable diseases. And I went and looked at all of the government papers up until March 2020, and they were still thinking about this entire problem through the prism of pandemic flu, which is not something you seek to contain. It just goes through the population. But we knew from February that this was being contained in Asia. And when they looked at the modeling, they only really modeled either free flow of the virus or complete lockdown. They didn't look at containment as an option. And Chris Whitty has admitted, extraordinary admission, that they didn't ramp up testing in that crucial period in late January and February and early March, even though many people were asking for it, but they didn't publish the scientific advice. Do you remember, they became extraordinarily closed in the way that they were advising government. They didn't want anyone to know what advice they were given. And it was a classic problem of a monolithic view that could easily have been challenged by some insights from the outside. So I think this is going to be one of the great lessons of COVID. There's a long way to go, by the way, and it may well be that it does become endemic in the end. But there's no doubt at all, there's a consensus now amongst scientists that we should have ramped up testing earlier, and we should have modeled for coronavirus with containment. And we didn't do that. And it seems to me very clear from the remarkable minutes that have been published that this was a clear problem of groupthink.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much. I wasn't aware of that, and what a great example. I'm conscious of time, and thank you, Matthew, so much for sharing your insights. I feel like we could continue this, and we might need to bring you back at some point to check in where we are with Mission Beyond, and hopefully some of the insights are helping us to advance what we're trying to achieve with it.
I just want to say, I'll sign on. I know I'll probably have to go in a minute, but I want to say thank you for inviting me. I love what you're doing, Mara, Cain, all of you. It's a great project. I have loved if anyone wants to email me and with questions, or if you want to forward them to me, my email address is very easy to find on the internet. I've actually seen a few people on this chat that I think I know. So it's been great to be a part of this. I want to congratulate you on what you're doing. And I've really enjoyed being a part of this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Cain, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. That's been brilliant. I think we've got another 22 questions in the Q&A, so we'll probably facilitate that and try and get them answered for you. There's so many there that we didn't have time, obviously. So I think we're done. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. We've kept it within 4 minutes of the original planned time. We're really excited about the initiative. I hope you are too, and that you're interested in getting involved to help us have impact to society together as a community. So we'll be in touch, as I said earlier, to set up next stage conversations. and we'll share some content from the day, and we hope to see you all at subsequent events. We'll plan for the next one to be in September. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your week and your weekends. Goodbye. Thank you.